So I feel kind of dumb making this video, and I was honestly just gonna like not even make this video and just let my slow transition back to Next.js. But I figured maybe y'all can just hear my perspective on the Go HTMX journey I went on for 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago, I made a video called Goodbye JavaScript. It got a lot more views than I was expecting. And also the Primogen reacted to it, which I was actually psyched about. I appreciate you reacting to my video. But with that all being said, and all the complaining that I did in that video about like the performance of my node server eating up memory and how Go is like so much more performant and just simpler to create a bundle with, as I started coding with Go and HTMX and Temple, there's just so much stuff I ran into. And I realized that I would rather have a hit in performance if I have a good developer experience. And so this video, I'm going to talk about some of the things I ran into when coding with Go, Temple, HTMX, and things that I'm just like, I don't really like this. I'd rather just switch back to Next.js. Maybe it's because I'm just a JavaScript developer and I'm familiar with Next.js. And so my opinions are probably going to be biased. Secondly, it's also because I'm using VS Code. A lot of these complaints are because I'm using VS Code and not NeoVim. But let me just list out some of the things that bothered me about Go and Temple, and I would say these concerns like impacted me enough where I just felt a relief coding in Next.js again. So let's talk about some of these things, and you guys can leave comments. I know you guys are going to leave comments and be angry because I'm not embracing Go fully. Let's talk about the good about Go. I'm not writing Go off. I think Go is a very simple language to learn. I think it's very performant, like I mentioned before. But at the same time, it's very verbose. I miss my string interpolations. Like I'm noticing I have to do a lot of format, printf. Let's see where I'm doing that. Printfs. Okay, I'm doing a lot of format printfs just to interpolate a string. It's not that big of a deal, but it's enough where I'm like, dude, it's just kind of annoying that I can't just say like user subscribed email. Okay. This is more concise than this. And when you write this enough throughout your application, you start missing it in Next.js, okay? Not a big deal. It's not a deal breaker, but again, it's just the little things, and the little things add up. Let's talk about the error handling in Go. I think the error handling in Go is light years better than Node. When you are calling a Node function, you have no idea if it could even throw an exception. And you need to make sure you are putting try catches at least somewhere up higher in your application so you can handle when whatever arbitrary function you call throws an exception. It's very like obscure. You don't know what the function's going to do. In Go, the errors are returned. And so when you call a function, usually you know just by looking at the function definition that, hey, this thing could potentially error out. You probably want to handle it. Now, granted, this can be ignored. Like I don't actually have to handle the errors. Right, so just like wrap this whole thing in a try catch, bubble the error up to the user, tell the user to try again, that type of sloppy coding, right? So there is a lot of benefit to the error handling in Go, and I'm definitely going to give it the win there. But I will say that it gets a little verbose at times, and I'm like, dude, if I can't write to my database, like I just want this thing to error out. Like right here, I just want this thing to panic. Now, granted, there are some errors that you actually want to check and make sure that like, hey, if this was just like a connection reset error or a connection timed out error when trying to write to my database or trying to make a fetch request to a third-party API, then yeah, maybe I could just wrap it and retry logic in my Go app and do something different based on that error. But there's something nice about Node.js, and like I can just hack stuff together, and like if it just throws an error, whatever, like the UI will show an alert saying try again. And again, this is from an indie hacker standpoint. This isn't I'm working at a Fortune 500 company. I need to make sure every single error is handled. This is more of the context of my mindset of what I want to achieve in my spare time after work. Handling all these errors is just something I just don't care about. But again, I'm going to give Go the win on that because I do think it's a better way to handle errors. I hear Russ is also really great at that too. Stuff like this, parsing an int, it's just so verbose. Now, granted, I am new to Go and there might be better ways to do this, but like the fact that I'm passing in an email and then I just need to convert it to a string, and then this could potentially throw an error. So now I need to say, oh, if it throws an error, I need to panic. Granted, I don't even know if Fiber is going to return the correct status code when this thing errors. So I don't think I'm doing this right either. I should probably have like a higher order function that's wrapping all this to catch errors and maybe change the status code and return that. I think the proper way to do this would be like c.send status of, I don't know, 500 or something. I'm sorry, it's fiber dot, I don't know, bad request. So that's what I should be doing instead. But I feel like it would just be nicer if instead maybe I could just like not catch these errors. But I think if I do this, then like this thing won't panic. Like it'll just call this, and this would probably throw an error at some point, and then like I don't know. Anyway, let me move on from that because my lack of Go is shining through, and you guys are going to call me out in the comments, but I just don't care. Let's go to the temple syntax. Temple, there's something about temple that I just don't like, right? When I'm making an endpoint, often I wish I could just write a simple template right here. Like I just want to inline a little alert and send it back. But what temple you end up doing is you have to have these temple files. And the one thing that I hate the most about temple, especially in VS Code, is when I command click on a template, it takes me to my compiled generated Go file, which is completely pointless to load up. And so then I end up going over here and I'm like, okay, well, I opened the wrong file. Let me click on this one and let me try to find the function I was originally trying to look for. Okay, here it is. And that disconnect in my editor is enough for me to say, I do not want to use temple. Okay. It's small stuff like that where it's like, I would rather just use JSX because it just works better. Now, again, this is where I'm saying NeoVim may have solved this issue, but it's just stuff like this. And then you look over here and you're like, you have a temple file and then you have a Go file. And there's also some text files in some of these that the temple files sometimes generate. I don't know why there's no .txt files now, but they were a second ago. So now you have like all these random files in your code base that kind of just pollute what you're trying to do. It's like, I don't care about these files. And sometimes when I'm collapsing them, they just automatically open back up again. But overall, I mean, like if that wasn't an issue, I think Temple's pretty good. I mean, like you have the type safety. I can pass whatever types to this thing and it's going to error out if I'm passing the wrong types. So some other complaints. When I was using Temple, I found that when I navigated between pages, sometimes the Temple proxy, which is something I'm using to basically force my browser to reload when I save a temple file or when I save a Go file. I'm using temple generate watch with this proxy, and that is basically treating like a live reload. Sometimes this whole thing would just block up my tab. Like my Chrome tab would freeze up, and I have to close it, and then I have to open a new one. I opened an issue on the Temple GitHub. I believe that's been fixed by the maintainer of Temple. But it's just like enough of running into these little small issues where you're like, okay, there's another tick off the box why I don't want to use this. Granted, if someone else ran into that bug and this got fixed before I picked it up, maybe I wouldn't be so frustrated with it. But if you run into enough frustrations with trying out a stack, you're like, I just don't care about this stack anymore. The great thing about Next.js and Vite and all these other things is that like typically they've done a very, very good job just making the hot module reloading work perfectly fine. Like with Next.js, I save a file and typically I go back to my UI and it's automatically refreshed. By the time I switch screens, my page is already refreshed with my change. Granted, I could just have a bad setup, but again, like that's another problem with using these type of stacks is that you end up like hacking all these things together yourself, trying to figure out your own solution to a problem that I'm sure every other developer who's doing this stack has solved already. Like I mentioned, some good things about Go. I love how it compiles down to a binary and the binary is super small and I can deploy that super easily anywhere. That's awesome. I like that. I do like the type safety in Go. Sometimes when I'm coding with Go, I feel like it's just missing something. Like it's too rigid. I don't know how to explain this. It just feels sometimes very rigid. And I'm coming from TypeScript where you can throw innies on anything. But again, coming from that indie hacker standpoint, I just want to quickly prototype something. And TypeScript definitely takes the win with that. Because if I'm not in the mood to type stuff or create a type, or if I just want to throw on a union type somewhere, I can do that in TypeScript very easily, right? You might argue, well, that's bad coding. Again, I'm coming from an indie hacker mindset of I just want to move fast, prototype something, throw it away, refactor it, make it better later. And that's just a trade-off between like a strongly type or strictly type language versus TypeScript, which is, I don't even know what you call that. It's just a monstrosity, but it works, right? And it gives you that flexibility to like turn off typing when you truly just want to, like I have this idea and I need to implement it and I don't want the type system telling me, no, stop your whole thought process because you need to actually put a type on this parameter here. It's like, no, I don't care. I already know it's an app. Let me call a method on it, you know? Anyway, that is a complete side tangent. So some good things is I'm using Fiber and I do feel like Fiber was super fast and it feels like I'm writing Express.js or like any other type of, you know, micro backend framework where I can just do routes and middlewares and stuff like that. So I felt familiar in that aspect, and it was pretty nice. I won't complain about that. Now, granted, I didn't really prepare for this video. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, the things that I liked, the things I didn't like, and so there's no structure to this. But one thing that started to annoy me a lot is how rigid the package system is in Go. And what I mean by that is that, like, it feels very rigid that the package you're in has to match the directory that you're in. Okay, I tried to do like a file-based route approach here where I'd have like a dashboard page, a login page, a logout page, an unsubscribe page, stuff like that. And inside the dashboard page, I'm like, well, I just want to go ahead and just put a couple of like components inside a subfolder so I can easily find them when I'm just like navigating this. But when you do that, you're forced to basically make these be in a package that like matches the name of the folder. And then you have to like remember, well, you have to make this public because although this is a dashboard only component, you got to make it public so that I can actually import it from another page or route that lives on my dashboard. And so I feel like the packaging system is very strict or rigid in the sense that like you have to basically either put everything in the same folder or you just basically do what I just did and like you have to like make some stuff public. And then you find yourself going through here and just like changing the capital case of all this stuff as you're moving stuff around. And it just feels like busy work versus, I don't know, it just feels a lot more flexible in TypeScript and Node where like I can just import that thing. Like here's a function, I just want to import it from this file that lives who knows where. I don't care. Just give me that file. That's all I want to invoke. And then if I want it to be a private module or a private function, I literally just don't export it so that everything in this file can have access to that. So that's kind of something that I miss about Node. But again, that's just more of a mindset shift. I have to get used to how Go works with packages and stuff. And it's kind of like, well, you just have to do it that way. That's just how it works. Overall, when it comes to Go, my final opinions are, if you came to me and said, hey, Cody, we need you to build the most performant backend you can do, how would you do it? Don't worry about the front end. You never have to touch front end code again. I would pick Go. Honestly, I would still pick Go. I think having this type of strict language where everything is typed and you have like these built-in constructs for doing channels, it just has a better concurrency model than Node.js in my opinion. Like in another video I just did the other day, I kind of talked about node workers, and node workers are just like a nightmare compared to like pushing to a channel, right? It's just so convenient and elegant in Go of like, I just need to do some work on a queue here, just push into a channel that'll get picked up by some other process. And it's just nice. So like I said, if you came to me and said you are in charge of like building out a complete REST API or just backend microservices, you don't ever have to worry about a front end and you're on a larger team, I would say Go is probably a really good choice. But if you said, hey, Cody, you're a one-man team, I need you to work on 3 different projects and I need you to context switch between them, possibly multiple times a day. That's when I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to pick Next.js or some type of all-inclusive framework that uses TypeScript on the front end and the back end. Granted, I know people hate TypeScript. They say that TypeScript should never run on the back end. But in my opinion, there are a lot of benefits of not having the context switch between 2 ecosystems. Whether you agree with it or not, but when your backend is written in Go, you then have a completely different mindset you have to think about. A different package manager, a different make files. It depends on how you're doing like your builds and your runs. And then you have your front end that's using a completely other set of tools and ecosystem, like, I don't know, ES Build or TurboPack and Next.js and ESM modules. For me in my brain, not having the context switch between 2 different languages and 2 completely different ecosystems is a huge win, especially if you have to maintain multiple projects at the same time and you have to switch between them often throughout the day. My goals on this channel and everything I do on my channel is just on the side. I just do this with some extra free time after work. I'm trying to do that whole indie hacker thing where I build a project, I try to launch it, I try to get some users. If it doesn't work, I move over to another project. Sometimes I'll work on 2 or 3 different projects in a day and I'll just ship one feature for one product, move on to the next, ship another feature. Having a separated front end and back end is hard enough to get all set up and automated with CI/CD. And then add on top of that, your backend's in a completely different language and ecosystem. That's not complexity that I'm willing to trade off. All right, let's move on to HTMX. HTMX overall, I mean, from the get-go, I'll say no. I don't like HTMX. I think the idea is pretty cool, but I think the mental model with all these front-end frameworks like Vue, Svelte, React, the model is you have a data model, and when that data model updates, your UI reflects that data model. And I think that is a lot easier to reason about, at least for in my brain, than your backend is responsible for sending over the components when your front end does certain actions. And the reason I find that very painful is that you have like IDs that are spread out through all your components. And then when you click a button or submit a form, your backend has to like keep that in mind of like your controller needs to know, okay, now we need to send over a different template. And then we have to basically target different IDs in the front end to swap out like an alert or show, I think somewhere over here I show like an error. And then the backend has to basically keep those IDs in its head. Again, like there's no type safety with any of this stuff. So I have to like find certain IDs and then like use out-of-band swaps to throw an error alert somewhere on the page or swap out some content down here. And I just find this very unmaintainable. Granted, I've only been playing around with this for like 2 weeks, and so maybe I just haven't drank the Kool-Aid enough. But coming from React and Svelte and Vue, I just don't think this is a long-term maintainable solution, especially if your UI starts getting more and more complex over time. Now, granted, I do think there's some really nice things in HTMX. For example, like the indicators are pretty cool. Like when I submit a button, I can just basically say, find my indicator that lives in this button. I have like a component here that basically loads up an indicator. And then I have an HTMX indicator here, which shows a spinner. And I mean, that's like one line, right? I just have to add one attribute to my DOM to have the indicator automatically show. But kind of looking at this code, it's like, some of the things I ran into is like when I'm trying to get the UI back into the same state that I need it to be in to debug, sometimes you might have a page and it takes submitting a form and then the backend does something and then the form changes to a state. Then inside that new state, there was a tab that you clicked. So it takes like 3 actions to get back to the same state as it was. And the only way to get to that state is by doing all these actions manually. Versus in Vue and Svelte and React, I mean, you have like this data model. You go in here, you flip some flags, and now your UI is in the exact state that you need it to be as you're doing development and debugging. That is just much easier in my opinion. There's other stuff over here like this hx include. I have a subject, an HTML, and a text. These are just arbitrary inputs on this page that I want to include when someone clicks this button and it does a post request to this endpoint. To me, this just doesn't seem like a good approach, right? There's just arbitrary IDs on these inputs. We're just saying include them when the form submits. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just not a fan. Like I tried to give HTMX a solid try. I truly did. I tried to come in here with like a cool mindset of like, oh, this is awesome. I can like have buttons do stuff and call endpoints and the endpoints return back some arbitrary stuff. It just feels more difficult. Like it feels like there's more friction to build something simple compared to when I'm using like React. And so somewhere through this journey, I was like, you know what, maybe it's just Go and Temple that's really distracting me from HTMX. Maybe HTMX is actually pretty cool. And so what I did was I built an entire application using HTMX in Hono, okay? So here's another application. I said, you know what, let's just move away from Go for a little bit and give HTMX another try using Hono, which is in JavaScript, which is what I'm familiar with. And then I end up writing some weird stuff like this, where when I type into an input box, I want a counter to basically decrement as the user types into this text area. And you end up writing some weird stuff like this. Granted, if you're an HTMX expert or an Alpine expert, there might be a super easy way to do this. But just by using HTMX alone, the fact that I'm like writing JavaScript code like this, I would much rather there be some state called remaining characters or some derived state in React where I can just get the input value, do the length on it, and just like subtract it by 10,000 and then just render that out. And I actually did that over here, right? I have a remaining characters over here. And to kind of show you what I mean, I'm actually rewriting this application back in Next.js because I cannot swallow HTMX. There's something about it, I cannot just agree with it. Maybe you love it, but I just can't. So again, this is easier to reason about for me. And so this is the code. Basically, I just do 10,000 minus what the current length is of my form value, and then I display it. It's like the little things like that, which it's very nice to have Vue or React or Svelte, where you have like this data model, and then all you need to do is just update that data model, recompute it, and then all of a sudden your UI is going to reflect that state automatically. Versus if you want to get that with HTMX, you end up writing some vanilla JavaScript. Maybe doing it inline wasn't the best approach, but if you don't do it inline, what you end up doing is you put it in some script tag down below, and then that becomes even harder to maintain because now the script tag has to reference this text area using an ID, and then you're like going back and forth between like random IDs and stuff. And then keep in mind there's no type safety, right? So like I don't know what IDs are on the page that I can even reference or are being used. And so now you just have a bunch of IDs that are like, oh, look at this. I have an ID called remaining. I better make sure I never remove this ID because then this functionality will break. It's just easier to see with TypeScript that, hey, that thing is derived from this and this thing depends on this. But overall, I mean, I think the idea of HTMX is pretty cool. Like the swapping, the ability to basically call an endpoint, the endpoint returns some HTML and you can swap it out on the page. Really, really cool, especially for a really basic application. But I feel like as your apps get a little bit more complex or you have multiple things that need to happen on a page, it's just harder to maintain. And again, this is like another thing where I started using HTMX, I legit ran into various bugs related to like indicators and buttons not re-enabling when I switch pages. And then I opened like pull requests to the HTMX library and the maintainer actually fixed those bugs. So there's 2 bugs that I pointed out and I complained about on Twitter. The maintainer fixed them. But it just goes to show that it's like, bro, I just picked this up within like a week and I'm hitting bugs in Temple. I'm hitting bugs in HTMX. And I'm curious, are other people not building UIs that are sophisticated? Because like if I'm hitting this day 1, because if I'm hitting issues with like loading indicators staying up or buttons not disabling, either I'm using HTMX the completely wrong way, or like people are not actually building sophisticated software with HTMX. But again, those are just more hurdles that I run into. Oh, look, here's another ID, a random error ID. I'm assuming that somewhere on the back end, this is going to swapped out with an error. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of it. So yeah, I tried to give it 2 solid tries. Again, I only do this part-time. I only do this in my spare time. If I had a whole month to play around with HTMX, maybe my opinions would change a little bit. Maybe I would not be so harsh on it. But I just don't have that much time to like really investigate these tools. But at least I am investigating it. I feel like a lot of people online were hyping up HTMX and no one actually uses it. Like no one actually built anything with it. I'm actually trying to build something with it and I'm realizing I don't want to build with it anymore. All right, I don't even know what else to talk about. I mean, I talked about Go, I talked about Temple and how I don't like it. I talked about HTMX, how I don't like that. So at this point, I'm okay just swallowing the fact that I'm just going to become a Next.js developer. I'm just going to be a JavaScript dev. You backend devs can make fun of me for just wanting to be a JavaScript dev, but I have been coding in JavaScript for almost 10 years now in TypeScript. And at this point, I'm so used to coding in TypeScript and having like end-to-end type safety and having like the flexibility to move fast. Like any package you'd ever need, like you're going to find it in React. And you can probably implement it in like 30 minutes to an hour. Like no joke. For everything in Project Planner AI, which is another application that I worked on using Next.js and Convex, everything you see in this application, literally like, oh, we need to have some Kanban board. We just went and found some arbitrary package, brought it in, and now we have Kanban functionality. Like it took us like 30 minutes to an hour to get a basic Kanban board set up. And then we just spent a little bit more time adding like drag drop functionality. And honestly, I just don't think it's possible to achieve this level of productivity using Go or HTMX. Like there's probably not libraries and packages already set up for you where you can just bring them in, import a module, throw in a random component somewhere, and then you have like drag and drop functionality out of the box. Again, like I said, like when you have more sophisticated UIs, like we have a bunch of cards. These cards can be searched over. These cards can be filtered over. These cards can have multiple different filters on at the same time. I can turn on and off manual ordering of these cards. When you have state, and then you have actions that derive the view from that state, it's such an easier mental model to like implement nice, sophisticated UIs. Oh, we can even swap between tables and cards just by clicking a button. I'm not saying that you can't implement this with Go and HTMX and Temple. I'm just saying I have not found a stack out there that gives me the same level of productivity as Next.js does and React does and this whole ecosystem that I've been using on my channel for a while. I've tried using Laravel earlier this year. There's a whole fiasco about Laravel. I made fun of it and I decided to try it out. And then I ended up just missing TypeScript. I ended up missing my autocompletion of my editor, my end-to-end type safety. I felt like the IntelliSense was not good. Again, the recommendations were, well, you should stop using VS Code and switch over to something else. And it's like, I don't want to have to learn a new editor just to use your stack. Laravel is pretty cool. I would say Laravel has a bunch of baked-in functionality, which can be very appealing to a lot of people. But I don't know. I just like the flexibility of I want to install some random ORM package and not have to use what Laravel prescribes me. And when I say I tried Laravel, I legit cloned or I forked Coolify. I made a pull request. I tried to fix some functionality with the registration page. I made this pull request and it got merged. And I'm actually excited about that. Andres, who shout out to him for doing Coolify, this is a really cool product. He says he's not even aware of the old function I used. So it's I picked up Laravel in a day or two. And I'm using stuff that the person who's maintaining this project doesn't even know about. And I'm not saying that to bash Andres. I'm saying that to say that I'm not just saying, oh, I tried Laravel. I legit read through the documentation. I learned some stuff. I applied it to the UI that I was trying to fix. And overall, it's just it works. It's not for me. Another project I tried forking and playing around with was Techromancy's 00. This is an emailer that I kind of talked about on my project before. He's using Elixir. I read through this. I tried to play around with it. The Elixir syntax is just very interesting. Just something about it I just don't like. I guess what I'm getting at is over the past month or so, I've been trying to push into different directions of let's try a little bit of Laravel. Let's try a little bit of Elixir. Let's try a little bit of Go. Let's try a little bit of HTMX and Temple and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, it's I'm kind of done trying new stuff. I've just come to palate the fact that I'm just a Next.js JavaScript developer and I'm able to ship stuff very fast with it. And I'm okay with that. And that's what I'm going to stick with. And I'm going to stop wasting your time switching between various stacks. And I'm going to go back to what I know and what I enjoy and what I actually love coding with. And that is TypeScript and JavaScript. So sorry for wasting your time and hyping you up on Go if you guys got excited. But I'm going to switch back to my normal scheduled content. Maybe I'll do some Go stuff once in a while. This isn't the first adventure time I've done with Go. If you scroll back, I was doing a distributed key value store with Go a long time ago and played around with that for about 2 weeks. And I learned a little bit about Kubernetes and stuff. So yeah, I don't know what I'm even saying at this point. Hope you guys enjoyed watching. Have a good day. Happy coding. And yeah, let's just get back to Next.js and actually shipping stuff.